Yo guys, DANIMAL here, back again with another WoW in 2020 new players guide. So we've covered a lot of the basics. We've covered do we want to play, we've covered movement, we've covered key binding, we've covered tanking, healing, DPS, getting into dungeons. So next is going to be more focused on the character itself. We're going to learn about how to gear, what sort of gear we should be looking out for, and kind of clear up all of the questions you might have surrounding like stats and everything that are on the top. So let's get into it. Roll the music. Okay guys, right, so gearing. This is it. This is the bread and butter of WoW. Grabbing gear, equipping it, and making you more powerful. So I think the best way to get started is to open up your inventory pane and look at what you've currently got. You can see that most of the gear slots are all filled up. If you've been leveling via dungeons or by questing, by now you should probably have like pieces of gear, but you're probably just equipping it randomly if you haven't figured out how the gear system kind of works. But that's why I'm here, to kind of help clear it all up. Now, there are different qualities of item in WoW. You've got poor quality, which is highlighted in kind of a grey text when you see what the actual piece of gear is called. I'll put an example up on the screen. We have common, which is white. You have uncommon, which is labeled in green. We have rare, which is labeled in blue. Epic, which is labeled in purple. Legendary, which is kind of like a dark orange color. And there has been some artifact, which is like in a goldy color, but that tends to be special, very, very special items centered around the expansion that we're playing in. The order that I just explained that in was the kind of order of rarity and quality of the gear. So a green item will tend to always be worse than a blue item. A blue item will almost always be tending to be worse than an epic item. However, the best way to kind of differentiate the kind of item's power level is by what's called item level. So just to give a brief explanation of item level wasn't particularly a thing for a long while in WoW itself, but then became a bit bigger in recent years that Blizzard actually adopted kind of the item level system to help differentiate the power of certain pieces of gear. So almost all the time, a higher item level piece of gear is going to be better than the lower counterpart to it. It's when we start getting into the end game, when we start looking at stats, which we'll go through in a minute, is where it kind of changes. So as you can see from the example I put up now, this is a smaller item level to the one that I'm going to put up now. But when we were thinking back to the rarity guide, one item was a blue and then the next item was a green. Now this green is actually a higher item level than the blue and should be taken over the blue because of that. So in a nutshell guys, the higher the item level, the better the piece of gear will be, and that's the piece you should equip. I did mention in endgame that when stats become a bit more important, that's when things are going to get a little bit different. So if I start going on about stats, there are a few different types of stats. Primary stats, secondary stats, and extra bonus rolled stats. The extra bonus rolled stats, you don't really need to worry about them. They are just added little bonuses that Blizzard added to make things look a bit more exciting. They don't have the hugest change. They're not something that you pursue and look out for and, you know, try to aim for. They are just, as Bob Ross would say, happy little accidents. I love you, Bob. Our main focus will be grabbing them primary stats and them secondary stats that are affiliated to our class and our spec. All the pieces of gear that you will obtain will have like flexible stats. So if you're a healer but you want to go into your DPS, so a druid, if a druid wants to be in his healing spec, his gear will automatically have intellect on. and it will have a grayed out sort of number which will say agility, so that when he switches to a feral druid or a bear, the agility will take over and the intellect will go grayed out. So you will always have those stats on all the pieces of gear that will have primary stats on. You will always have stamina, and one of the primary main stats for your spec and your class, which will be intellect, strength, or agility. The secondary stats is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. There are 4 different secondary stats in the game: haste, mastery, crit, and versatility. Now, dependent on what spec you're playing, will have a priority in order of which you want to try and obtain these stats. Now, these secondary stats can be found out on, as we've done before, resourcing. You can find them on Icy Veins. You can just type in stat priority for the specking class that you're playing, and you'll find the list of what would be best for you, like an initial list. It gets a little bit confusing when you're doing the end game stuff, because there's a lot of like simulation you can do to find out if you need certain X amount of the next stat, or you're missing a little bit of haste, and if you get a little bit of haste, even though it's not your main secondary stat, will push you up a little bit extra more damage, and etc, etc. But that's the kind of confusing stuff that we'll go through in an end game video, because I think we'll go up to end game gearing rather than just general gearing. But if you just learn your initial secondary stat kind of priority, it will always be your main stat, which will be the primary stat, which will be the agility, the intellect, strength, and then you'll have, for example, crit, haste, mastery, versatility in that order. So you know that you'll be prioritizing pieces of gear that have crit and haste on, because that's in your order. If you get all of your gear in those pieces, then effectively you're playing at your maximum capacity at that time. But like I said, it does get a little bit confusing later on in the end game when you're trying to min-max everything. But as a guide, I would look on the Icy Veins and Wowhead to find out your stat priority, just so that you can kind of get used to doing that. So the last thing that I want to mention is kind of like an off thing from gearing, but you might put on, say, like a new chest piece and it looks really dumb, and you really like the look of your old chest piece. Well, in WoW, you can transmogrify those pieces of gear that you wear to look like another piece, which is shortened to transmog. This is a really big thing in WoW, and I think this is why I wanted to end the video talking about transmog, is that I don't want anyone to think, but I really don't like the look of that sword, it looks really stupid, I want to use my weaker sword because it looks really cool. Because you're playing an RPG, you want to get into a little bit of fantasy, you want to look cool at the same time. You can change that gear to look like another piece of gear, and like I said, transmog's a huge thing in WoW, so don't ever worry about what your gear looks like, just worry about the stats. Right, I think that's the best way to end. Guys, thank you for listening, take care, and I'll catch you in the next video.